Hey guys, welcome to this final set of videos in the language topic. We're going to go through the final discussion and the final debate in this topic, which is where does non-verbal behaviour come from? Is it innate or is it learned? And this video is going to focus on the innate argument. So we're going to run through Darwin's explanation of non-verbal behaviour and some evaluation of Darwin's explanation. Now, I'm not going to go into full detail on Darwin and who he was and what he said, but I'm just going to give you the basics of what you need to know. So, Charles Darwin is a well-known sort of scientist who believes that non-verbal behaviour is innate and it is genetic. Basically means that we are born with non-verbal behaviours. So facial expressions, gestures, personal space, all that stuff, eye contact. He says we're born knowing how to do it. So he believes this because he says that non-verbal behaviour has evolved with us. It's been naturally selected as a behaviour or a set of behaviours that has improved and helped our survival. So things like closed postures, things like having a good personal space, things like facial expressions, they've evolved with us because they have helped us survive. Now, he now calls these behaviours that remain, these non-verbal behaviours, he calls them serviceable habits. The reason he calls them serviceable habits is because they are habits, which means they're behaviours that we can't stop doing, and they're serviceable because they used to provide a purpose, which was to help us survive. Now, we are living in a society now where we don't really need those behaviours to help us survive, but because they have been ingrained in our sort of evolutionary change so strongly and powerfully, they are part of who we are. So, for example, thousands of years ago, our ancestors would use certain facial expressions to help protect them from predators and diseases. They would cross their arms to protect themselves from predators. We obviously don't really need to do all of that now, but because our ancestors did it, that has now stuck with us. So, Darwin argues that non-verbal behaviours are innate, they are genetic, they have evolved with us, and they are called serviceable habits. So what evidence is there to back him up with his argument that non-verbal behaviour is innate? Well, firstly, we'll look at a little bit of research here into neonates. So neonates are brand new, newly born babies under 4 weeks old. And basically the argument is anything that a baby can do the second it is born must mean that it is an innate behaviour because they've not had chance or time to learn it, right? So from the second babies are born, within a couple of days, sometimes babies, neonates can smile, cry, show disgust, pain, and surprise. These are all facial expressions. These are all non-verbal behaviours. If you give a newborn baby something sour, they will scrunch their face up in a disgusted way to show that they didn't like that. So the fact that these babies can do these things from the second they are born does support the idea that these expressions are innate and genetic. So support for Darwin's argument. The second support comes from those people who are sensory deprived. So when we're talking about sensory deprived, we are talking about people who lack a sense. These could be people that are deaf or blind. These are people that are sensory deprived. What we're going to focus in on is blind people and babies and adults who are blind and have been blind since birth and therefore have never seen or they've never before seen or been shown any facial expression or any non-verbal behaviour. Yet, when we look at these people, they show the same facial expressions as healthy adults, children who are not sensory deprived. So if they are showing the same facial expressions and the same emotions in the non-verbal way, this must support the idea that non-verbal behaviour is innate. If they've never seen it, they've not been able to pick it up and learn it from anywhere, but they can still do it. So it must be an innate behaviour. So that's another bit of support for Darwin and his theory that non-verbal behaviour is innate. Finally, we're going to talk about a little bit of evaluation for Darwin from universal facial expressions. So if something is universal, it means that it happens everywhere, and I mean all over the globe, all over the world. And what we typically say is if something happens all over the globe, if all humans do it, it must be a genetic part of human nature and human behaviour. So what we have found, or what psychologists have found, is that every single culture in the world uses and recognises a set of facial expressions known as universal facial expressions. So things like happiness, sadness, fear, shock, surprise, anger. Those are the key sort of 6 or 7 facial expressions which everyone around the world seems to use and seems to recognise. So if every single person in the world does something, that also means that it must be an innate human behaviour because it's part of human nature. So it's not a case of different cultures have learnt to do certain things. Every single human can do it, therefore it is an innate thing. So in terms of how this could look in an exam, here's just 2 random sort of model questions which you could get. One about describing Darwin's evolutionary theory of non-verbal behaviour, and one evaluate Darwin's evolutionary theory. So if I was going to describe it, I would definitely introduce the argument that he believes that non-verbal behaviour is innate and genetic. I'm going to explain that he said that non-verbal behaviour has adapted and evolved for survival purposes. For example, our ancestors used facial expressions to scare off threats and predators, and these behaviours that remain are called serviceable habits as they no longer serve the same purpose they used to. So that's a pretty decent explanation. It shows you've got the keywords in there and you understand what Darwin was saying. Now, if I want to evaluate him, I'm going to support him with some of the evidence that we've talked through here. So something like one strength to Darwin is he is supported by sensory deprived people. People who were born blind still produce the same facial expressions as other people, even though they've never seen them, to learn them, showing non-verbal behaviour is innate. I'd have to do another strength to get maximum marks, but that's just a little bit of a model, so you get the idea of that two-part evaluation process. So guys, the argument is that Darwin believes that non-verbal behaviour is innate, not learned, and we've got some evaluations to support Darwin's ideas and theories. I'll do another video with the learned argument, and you can compare the 2 arguments and make your own mind up.